If you're an activist who's been working near the southern border, perhaps around child imprisonment, migrant issues, things of that sort, there is a possibility the military itself has been tracking your activities. And we found out about this thanks to the great investigative reporting work of Ken Klippenstein, who joins us now on the Ambush Report. Ken, welcome back.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Great to have you here. So tell us about this reporting, which you co-published with TYT and the Intercept, correct?
That's right, yeah. What I found based on a commander's update briefing was that the Pentagon has been getting what are called situation updates. This is supposedly for situational awareness, about a number of different events. But what caught my eye was that some of them were totally nonviolent, peaceful protests in opposition to President Trump's border policies, specifically in the cases that I saw, family separation, and also demonstrations in front of ICE detention facilities.
So you mentioned there that some of them are nonviolent, but I would imagine for whole categories of this, like you talked about, like child separation and things like that, is there any violence? Is there any reason that these groups would be investigated by law enforcement, let alone by the military itself?
Well, what I thought was shocking about it was they were listed alongside a number of threats that certainly would be violent, what are called TCOs, transnational criminal organizations. These are things like drug gangs and stuff. And next to those, you see listed, again, it's a threat assessment. I linked to the document, or I embed the document in the article, which I would encourage people to go and look at. They list these three events, and I assume there must be some sort of violent component to it, because why else would they list them next to these drug gangs? But when I actually looked up the specifics of these events, because they don't actually name them, because there are certain protections that American citizens enjoy, and also the military is not supposed to, there are limits on what the military is supposed to do on domestic soil. When I sort of correlated the details of these events and looked into them, they seemed largely peaceful, and even ones where they called them anti-border policy extremists. These seem to emphasize civil disobedience, things of that nature that I don't think any reasonable person would associate with violence or criminality.
So in this document, was there anything that got into a potential justification for any of these groups or all of these groups to be investigated in the way that they were?
Well, what was interesting is at the bottom of them, it has a number of questions, and it almost looked like some sort of rote assignment you'd have in junior high or something, where you just have to answer some questions and move on to the next thing. And in fact, the folks I know in the Pentagon, a lot of them don't seem to take the border deployment very seriously. Recall that pursuant to President Trump's emergency declaration on declaring undocumented immigration national emergency, that has endowed the military with all sorts of extraordinary abilities to operate on domestic soil. One of which, of course, is intelligence collection. Mm-hmm. What that all shows is that. So if you look at the threat assessment at the bottom, there's a number of questions that are like, what is the threat posed by anarchists? What is the threat posed by border policy extremists? And it was like they're being prompted to go and find either justification or explanation for these different things that I assume were coming to them from some superior.
Perhaps unrelated to this, but there's obviously been militia activity at the border for some time. Groups that go down there, like literally specifically to stop migrants from crossing the border. There have been cases of murders and things of that sort. Was there an assessment of that sort of activity, of these militias from the interior of the United States heading down to the border, potentially to commit crimes?
Yeah, that's what's so amazing to me is that the document appeared to equate those two things. So it lists these militia groups and has very interesting specifics, the number of them, where they're located, what state, so on and so forth. And these are actually, very, these are groups that will, with some regularity, engage in violence and, serious criminal conduct. So it makes perfect sense to me that they'd be monitoring those groups. But I was just surprised that they were put sort of on a footing with these other groups that I can't find any evidence that they were engaged in any sort of criminal or violent activity.
And I believe in that same document there was a reference to fears that some of the caravans that have received a lot of press attention over the past few years, especially from Fox News, that they might be infiltrated by some sort of international either criminal organization or terrorist group. What was the assessment on that area?
That's right. It was almost hard for me to keep a straight face while I was reading that. I should note that the folks in the Pentagon feel similarly. That at least the ones that I know, they think a lot of this is ridiculous. But they actually assessed the migrant caravan for, what was it, penetration by foreign terrorist organizations and recruitment by foreign intelligence services, which is just it was a lot of poor Hondurans if you look at it. I mean, the notion, and President Trump and the vice president as well tried to push this idea that they actually said Middle Easterners had infiltrated these groups. So it does appear that this is coming from the White House.
Yeah, they seem to have mixed up the fact that they can't necessarily tell these groups apart with the idea that a bunch of people from Guatemala can't tell if some guy from Saudi Arabia is just hiding out in their group. I think they could tell. And there was one other thing though, in terms, so we have the investigation, which obviously seems ridiculous, but in terms of the methods they used, there seems to be some indication that in terms of their tracking of the group's membership over time, that they might be using social media, Facebook events, something like that.
I think that's right. If you look at the notations, the way they sort of describe changes, +1 to people showing interest, -1 to people intending to show up, that appears to reflect the language that's used by Facebook group stuff, and these are things that they're actually authorized under President Trump's declaration, and then also how the military sort of operates overseas. That those would be things that law enforcement typically collects, but now we have a case where the military is doing it, and that's as an expert explains in the story, is what's particularly concerning.
And so you say that it's concerning, but to the best of our knowledge, is it illegal? Is this something that should be pursued to find out whether they were actually violating people's constitutional rights and how they were collecting this information?
That depends on how far they went. Of course, I only have a snapshot from that particular document. I would guess that what was alluded to in the document was legal, but that's sort of the problem. Is that once you have an emergency declaration and permit the military to do things on domestic soil, which again, there are specifically laws against, because that has a corrosive effect on civil society and civil liberties. The fact that it's legal is sort of the problem now. I mean, do we want to have the military doing these things?
Yeah. Well, Ken, as always, really appreciate your work there. Great find here.
Great to talk to you, man.
Thank you for watching this clip from the Damage Report. For more content from the show and access to TYT Network members-only exclusives, go to tyt.com/Brooke. Wait, no, it's tyt.com/John. Go to tyt.com/John to sign up.